Perth, Western Australia, October 1986. The heat was heavy that year, a dry, breathless kind that clung to skin and made the edges of the horizon blur in the shimmering air. By day, the streets of Willagee lay under a harsh white sun, the asphalt radiating waves of heat. By night, a quiet settled in, a stillness so complete that even the faint hum of an electrical wire could seem loud. Willagee was neither the poorest nor the richest part of Perth. It was the kind of suburb where houses sat close together, front yards half-kept, paint fading from weather, and curtains always drawn. Some streets seemed perfectly ordinary in daylight, but at night there was a different feeling, an unspoken understanding that not every door here was safe to knock on. Moorhouse Street was one such place. From a distance, it looked like any other row of modest homes. But one house in particular, with its peeling paint, sagging porch roof, and shadowed front windows, held a secret far darker than anyone imagined. Inside that house lived David and Catherine Birnie. To the unknowing neighbor, they were just another middle-aged couple, quiet, kept to themselves, paid their rent on time. But behind those closed doors, they shared something most couples never would, a bond forged not in love or tenderness, but in a shared appetite for control, cruelty, and domination. David Birnie's life had been shaped by chaos from the very beginning. Born in 1951 into a household steeped in instability, his earliest memories were of shouting, slammed doors, and the constant threat of being uprooted. His parents' relationship was a mess, volatile and neglectful, and the home was the kind of place where children learned quickly to fend for themselves. School offered no refuge. David was average academically, but his defiance toward authority was constant. Teachers noted the same thing over and over. He couldn't sit still, couldn't follow rules, and had a streak of manipulation that was far beyond his years. By his teens, he was already gravitating toward petty crime, breaking into houses, stealing cars, and engaging in behavior toward young women that hinted at something darker. There was no clear line between his need for thrill and his need to dominate. The two fed each other. For David, the rush came not just from breaking the law, but from pushing people into fear and submission. Catherine Harrison, born the same year as David, had a very different upbringing, but carried scars of her own. Her childhood was strict, emotionally cold, and governed by a set of rules that left no room for affection. She was clever and observant, the kind of girl who watched the world rather than rushed into it. But beneath her quiet exterior was a deep loneliness, a hunger for someone who could make her feel alive. She met David when they were both just 12. He was a boy who stood out, not for being handsome, but for the way he seemed untouchable, a little dangerous even at that age. Catherine found herself drawn to him immediately. For David, Catherine's attention was intoxicating. She admired him, didn't question his rule-breaking, and even seemed excited by it. Their teenage relationship was short-lived, cut off when Catherine's family disapproved and took steps to separate them. She was sent away and, in time, married another man in a bid to have a stable, respectable life. David went on to marry as well, though it was a brief and turbulent union. Yet neither ever fully let go of the memory of the other. When they crossed paths again in their early 30s, it was as if the years apart had done nothing to dull the spark, except now it wasn't a youthful crush. It was an obsession. Catherine was divorced and David was unattached. They slipped back into each other's lives with ease, but this time, the dynamic was different. David had grown into a man whose sexual desires were violent and deeply controlling. Many partners had been disturbed by this side of him, but Catherine embraced it. In her eyes, David could do no wrong, and she wanted to please him in any way she could. For David, Catherine was perfect. She didn't just accept his fantasies, she encouraged them, even pushed them further. By 1986, they were living together at the house on Moorhouse Street. The place was small, dimly lit, and carried an odd smell of stale cigarettes and unwashed dishes. In the evenings, they would sit in the front room, with the curtains drawn, talking for hours. Increasingly, their conversations revolved around one subject: women. Not just any women, but women they could take, control, and keep. At first, it was just talk, a fantasy, But the problem with fantasies shared between two people like David and Catherine was that they didn't stay fantasies for long. They began to plan. They discussed methods, what they would say, how they would lure someone in. Catherine's role would be key. She was to make potential victims feel safe, to disarm their suspicion. David would take control once they were inside. They began watching the street. They noted who walked past, who seemed vulnerable, who might accept a ride. David's job as a truck driver gave him a reason to be out, to scout potential targets, while Catherine's presence made them seem like just another harmless couple. Late in October, the plan was no longer just a conversation. It was something they were ready to act on. The sun had set, the street was quiet, and the air felt thick with the promise of something terrible. David looked at Catherine and told her it was time. She didn't hesitate. When they spotted their first target that night, there was no sign of hesitation, no flicker of doubt in their eyes. The woman accepted their offer of a ride. She could not have known she was stepping into the grip of two people whose love story had rotted into something lethal, a partnership that would come to be remembered as the Moorhouse murders. The evening air in Willagee was still warm, the light fading into a soft orange that made the shadows stretch long across the pavements. On the surface, it was a normal, late October night. A few cars passed, children's laughter echoed faintly from a house down the street, and somewhere a dog barked lazily. But inside the worn house on Moorhouse Street, the atmosphere was entirely different. David and Catherine Birnie were ready. They had talked for weeks about this moment, running through the steps again and again until it felt almost rehearsed. Catherine would sit in the passenger seat, her presence the key to lowering any suspicion. David would drive, scanning for the kind of target they had discussed. A woman walking alone, someone who wouldn't be missed for hours. Their first victim was a 22-year-old woman named Mary Nielsen, a student and part-time worker at a local motorcycle shop. She was petite, with a soft, approachable face, and she had crossed paths with David before. He had come into the shop where she worked, chatting casually, testing the waters of familiarity. That prior contact was no accident. It made her more likely to trust him. That evening, David and Catherine pulled up alongside her in their car, offering her a lift. Catherine smiled warmly from the passenger seat, and that smile was disarming enough to make Mary believe there was no danger. She climbed in. The drive was short. Conversation flowed easily. Small talk, nothing threatening. But once the car pulled up outside their Moorhouse Street home, something shifted. Mary hesitated briefly. She hadn't expected to be brought here. David assured her they just needed to pick something up quickly. Catherine backed him up with a calm, friendly tone. Reluctantly, Mary followed them inside. The moment the front door shut, the atmosphere changed completely. The curtains were drawn tight, the air thick with the stale smell of cigarettes. The cluttered living room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting more shadow than light. Before Mary could fully register the shift, David was behind her, a knife in his hand. Catherine closed the door and stood by, watching. David's voice was calm, almost casual, as he told her to do exactly what he said. Mary's confusion turned to fear, and her fear was exactly what fueled him. Catherine's eyes stayed on her partner, not with horror or hesitation, but with a strange kind of encouragement, as though she was silently telling him to keep going. Mary was taken to the bedroom. The space was messy, clothes scattered, sheets crumpled. What happened next was a pattern that would repeat with each victim. David assaulted her while Catherine remained in the room, a silent witness, sometimes participating in small, cruel ways that reinforced the idea that escape was impossible. For Mary, the reality set in quickly. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a misunderstanding. There was no bargaining with these people. David and Catherine didn't just want to harm her. They wanted to own the moment completely, to strip away her autonomy and reduce her to nothing but an object in their twisted game. When they were done, there was no discussion between the Birnies about whether to let her go. From the very start, the plan had always been the same. No one would leave alive. David took her from the bedroom, leading her into a side room where he kept a length of rope. Catherine followed. The killing itself was quick, but the calmness with which it was carried out made it even more chilling. Mary's body was wrapped and placed in the trunk of their car. The Birnies drove out toward Glen Eagles National Park under a moonless sky, the road empty and dark. They had already chosen a burial site, an isolated patch of bushland where the trees grew thick and the ground was soft enough to dig. By the time they returned home, it was the early hours of the morning. Inside the house, they sat together in the living room, drinking, talking, not about guilt, not about fear of being caught, but about how it had gone and what they could do better next time. For David and Catherine, this wasn't a one-time act. It was a beginning. Within days, they would be out again, scanning the streets, their hunger sharpened by the knowledge of how easy it had been. The days after Mary Nielsen's murder passed with an almost eerie normality. The newspapers carried no trace of her disappearance, at least not yet. Mary had been young, independent, the kind of woman who might have gone off for a few days without telling anyone. For David and Catherine, this silence from the outside world was intoxicating. It told them two things. They could get away with it, and they could do it again. The high from that first kill didn't fade. It sharpened into a restless craving. They began to talk almost immediately about finding their next target. This time, they didn't want to wait. They wanted to prove to themselves that what had happened with Mary wasn't a fluke. It was a formula they could repeat. It was only a matter of weeks before they spotted their second victim. She was hitchhiking along the Canning Highway, a stretch of road often used by people looking for a cheap, quick ride. Hitchhiking in 1986 Perth wasn't unusual, but it carried risks that David and Catherine were ready to exploit. The victim, 15-year-old Susanna Candy, was the kind of girl who radiated youthful trust. She was well-dressed for her age, a school uniform that made her seem harmless and approachable. David slowed the car, Catherine rolled down the passenger window, and with that same warm, practiced smile, asked if she needed a lift. Susanna accepted without hesitation. She got in, adjusting her bag on her lap, and the car pulled back onto the road. Catherine kept the conversation light, asking about school, friends, the weather, just enough to keep Susanna relaxed until they reached Moorhouse Street. Once again, the trap snapped shut as soon as the front door closed. The moment they were inside, David's demeanor changed entirely. Susanna was overpowered quickly, dragged into the bedroom, and restrained. The Birnie's method was becoming more refined. David played the aggressor, Catherine the enabler, the one who kept their captive compliant with false promises that she'd be let go if she obeyed. But Susanna was different from Mary. She was younger, more emotional, and her fear seemed to agitate Catherine. She wasn't just a passive spectator this time. She became more active, mocking and taunting the girl, reinforcing David's control. The psychological cruelty was as much a part of the assault as the physical violence. That night, after hours of terror, David and Catherine made a decision that shocked even themselves. They kept Susanna alive until the next day. They forced her to call her family, speaking in a calm, controlled voice to say she was fine and just staying with friends. The purpose wasn't to hide the crime. It was to toy with the people who cared about her, to buy themselves time and prolong their control. The next evening, David strangled Susanna with a rope while Catherine watched, her eyes fixed not on the victim, but on David's face. They drove out to the same patch of bushland where Mary was buried and placed Susanna's body nearby. The ground was beginning to hold their secret, but their appetite wasn't sated. If anything, killing Susanna so soon after Mary only made them more confident. Within days, they were hunting again, scanning bus stops, sidewalks, and lonely stretches of road for the next vulnerable figure. The third victim was a 31-year-old woman named Nolene Patterson, a well-known radio announcer. Picking her up was risky. She was a public figure, someone whose absence would be noticed. But David wanted the thrill of taking someone important, someone who would make headlines. When Nolene got into their car, she had no idea she was stepping into the hands of killers who already had a pattern: charm, abduct, assault, kill, and bury. But with Nolene, the pattern broke. David kept her alive for several days, holding her captive in the Moorhouse Street home. The reason, Catherine would later claim, was that David was infatuated with her. This infatuation was a threat to Catherine's position as his partner, and jealousy began to burn. Eventually, Catherine told David it was her or Nolene. The choice was made. and Nolene's body joined the others in the shallow bushland graves. By now, the Birnies had abducted and murdered 3 women in just over a month. The escalation was rapid, almost reckless, but they didn't feel reckless. They felt unstoppable. The house on Moorhouse Street had become their hunting lodge, their trap, and their private stage for the cruelty they shared. What they didn't know was that their 4th victim would be different, and that she would be the one to end their killing spree. By November 1986, David and Catherine Birnie were deep into their killing streak. The walls of their small Moorhouse Street home had absorbed the sounds of terror, their car had become a mobile snare, and their bushland burial site had grown into a grim collection of shallow graves. But the pace of their crimes was unsustainable. The more they killed, the more careless they became. Their final victim, a 17-year-old named Kate Moyer, was walking home after spending the evening with friends. It was late, and the streets were quiet. When the white sedan pulled up beside her, she saw a man behind the wheel and a woman in the passenger seat. A couple. That made her feel safe enough to accept the offer of a lift. After all, a man and a woman together didn't fit the usual image of danger. David drove in the direction Kate expected at first, but soon she noticed they were turning onto unfamiliar streets. She asked where they were going. Catherine gave a smooth, almost motherly answer. Just a quick stop at their house before dropping her home. Kate didn't want to be rude, but her instincts were already telling her something was wrong. When they pulled up to the house on Moorhouse Street, Kate hesitated, but Catherine's warm tone coaxed her inside. The moment the door shut, the tone vanished. David lunged, forcing Kate into a bedroom, and tied her up. The cycle began again. Verbal threats, sexual assault, and the constant presence of Catherine, who alternated between comforting words and cold cruelty. But Kate wasn't like the others. She was sharp, observant, and determined to survive. She studied the house, noting where the doors were, which windows were locked, and even which way the bedroom faced. She realized early on that she couldn't overpower them physically. Her escape would have to come from tricking them. Over the hours that followed, Kate played the role of the compliant captive. She didn't fight when told to move. She didn't scream when David was nearby. She even tried to make Catherine feel she could be trusted, speaking softly, asking for water, pretending to accept their situation. The following morning, David left the house briefly for work. Catherine was left alone with Kate, and in that moment, the balance shifted. Kate convinced Catherine to let her use the bathroom, talking in a way that made her seem harmless. As Catherine walked her there, Kate noticed the front door key hanging from a hook in the hallway. She committed it to memory. Later, when Catherine was distracted in another room, Kate seized her chance. She grabbed the key, unlocked the front door, and bolted barefoot into the street. She ran as hard as she could, adrenaline burning in her legs until she reached a nearby road and waved down a passing car. The driver, alarmed at the sight of a terrified teenager, took her straight to the police station. Kate's statement was clear, detailed, and damning. She described the house, the couple, and even gave directions to Moorhouse Street. Police moved quickly, surrounding the Birnies' home before David could return. Catherine was taken into custody first, calm, expressionless, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. David was arrested shortly after. When questioned, the Birnies initially denied everything, but Kate's testimony was airtight. Under mounting pressure, David eventually confessed, not just to Kate's abduction, but to the murders of Mary Nielsen, Susanna Candy, and Nolene Patterson. He led police to the bushland site where the bodies were buried. The case horrified Australia. The idea that a couple, a man and a woman working together, could commit such brutal crimes shattered public assumptions about how serial killers operated. The Birnies became a symbol of predatory partnership, their names forever tied to the Moorhouse murders. David Birnie was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He died in 2005, taking his own life in his cell. Catherine Birnie, also sentenced to life, remains in prison to this day, having been denied parole multiple times. She is considered one of Australia's most dangerous women. Kate Moyer's escape not only saved her own life, but ensured justice for the Birnies' victims. Her courage under unimaginable pressure ended a killing spree that could have claimed countless more lives. The Moorhouse house was eventually sold, its grim history whispered about by neighbors for years. But the story of the Birnies and the young woman who outsmarted them, remains one of the most chilling true crime